The city of Seoul, South Korea, a place where countless hunters roam, braving the dangers of dungeons to make a living. Among them is Sung Jin-Woo, a hunter so weak that even among others of the lowest rank, he is considered the weakest. Today, the next dungeon clearing operation is set at a construction site in Seoul, where a gateway connecting this world to another dimension has appeared. Before heading in, Hunter Kim, one of the squad members, decides to grab himself a cup of coffee. Just as he does, a familiar voice calls out to him. It turns out to be Hunter Park, a retired hunter who has decided to return to the field. The reason for his unexpected comeback is simple. His wife is pregnant, and money doesn't magically appear out of thin air. Hunter Kim understands the situation all too well and agrees that getting back into the hunter business is probably his best bet. However, Park doesn't hide his concerns. After being away from the battlefield for so long, he wonders if he's lost his edge. But Kim, rather than offering words of reassurance, simply tunes him out, his attention shifting elsewhere as someone familiar enters the scene. Sung Jin-Woo. The moment Jin-Woo arrives, another hunter in the squad immediately greets him. Watching the way everyone reacts, Park gets the impression that Jin-Woo must be a formidable hunter, someone highly respected among his peers. But Kim can barely contain his amusement at that assumption. With a grin, he sets the record straight. Jin-Woo isn't a powerful hunter. In fact, he's the weakest hunter. Jin-Woo, hearing Kim's mocking tone, doesn't even try to hide his disappointment. He's heard it all before, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating. Hoping to lift his spirits, he decides to grab a coffee for himself. Unfortunately, his luck seems to be as bad as ever. The coffee machine has just run out. The employee offers an apology, but that doesn't really change anything. Just then, a sudden voice calls out from behind him. Turning around, Jin-Woo spots a familiar face, Jae, a B-rank healer. The moment she sees him, her eyes widen in shock. Once again, he's covered in wounds. Jin-Woo explains that during his last dungeon expedition, the entire team had gone in without a single healer. Jae, visibly upset, expresses her frustration. It was just an E-rank dungeon, yet he was the only one who ended up injured. Again. She doesn't even bother hiding her concern for him. As Jin-Woo shares more details about the raid, Jae can't help but resent the way his team members handled things. But Jin-Woo, wearing his usual tired grin, brushes it off. This kind of treatment isn't new to him. He's long since gotten used to it. With a commanding shout, one of the hunters quickly gathers everyone together. Before they can proceed, an experienced hunter, Song, steps forward and calls for the attention of all present. Although he is naturally suited for leadership, he still expresses his willingness to take charge of this raid. There is no debate. His strength alone makes him the most capable among them, and the decision is unanimous. Even Jin-Woo, without hesitation, agrees with the choice. With their leader decided, the group steps into the dungeon. However, Jin-Woo is once again met with familiar concern, reminders not to push himself too hard. It seems his reputation for getting injured precedes him. Still, without delay, they enter the dungeon, a portal linking another realm to their world. Jin-Woo's expression says it all. He's prepared to give his best. Meanwhile, outside, the workers overseeing the raid ensure that all members have safely entered before sealing the entrance with protective fences. Even among them, a simple cafeteria worker sighs in regret, wishing he had been able to offer Jin-Woo a cup of coffee before he left. It's amusing, really. Even the cafeteria staff know of Jin-Woo's tendency to return from dungeons battered and bruised. Inside, the battle begins almost immediately, and the expected happens. Jin-Woo gets injured within moments. A squad member, skilled in healing magic, steps in to treat him. Among the hunters, Song makes quick work of the monsters with his formidable fire magic, reducing them to ashes, while Hunter Kim follows closely, effortlessly slicing through anything in his path. The rest of the hunters hold their ground, dispatching enemies efficiently and with ease. As the raid nears its conclusion, Jin-Woo can't help but notice a certain healer's lingering concern. Jae, despite her focus on healing, still seems troubled. Once all the monsters are dealt with and the group regathers, her curiosity remains evident. She simply cannot understand how Jin-Woo, despite suffering countless injuries, continues to push forward inside these dungeons. However, instead of revealing the real reason, his sick mother, Jin-Woo brushes off the concern with a casual remark, claiming that dungeon crawling is simply fun. Jae is not amused. Frustrated, she reminds him that every time he gets hurt, she's the one who has to patch him up. Her irritation is clear as she warns him not to let this so-called fun be his downfall. With the raid seemingly over, the group collects their rewards, crystals that drop from the defeated monsters. These can be sold to purchase better equipment for future hunts. However, Jinwoo's weakness is evident in his earnings. While the others secure valuable C-rank crystals worth thousands, he manages to obtain only a single E-rank crystal, barely worth anything. Just as they prepare to leave, one of the hunters stumbles upon something unexpected, a hidden passage leading deeper into the dungeon. The discovery halts everyone in their tracks. Before them lies a dark, seemingly endless cavern stretching into the void. Song, experienced as he is, immediately recognizes the signs. This isn't just a regular dungeon. This is a double lair. The true boss is still alive. Wasting no time, he conjures a fireball and hurls it into the depths. As it descends, the flames illuminate only a fraction of the massive cave before reaching their limit and vanishing into the darkness. That alone is enough to confirm his suspicion. A theory forms in his mind, and he reminds everyone of the dungeon's fundamental rule. If the boss isn't slain, the gate remains open. Since the entrance hasn't closed, the boss must still be lurking somewhere inside. By protocol, the right move is to report this to the Hunter Association and await further orders. The reaction from the group is mixed. Some exchange uncertain glances, not entirely understanding where Song is going with this. But then, he raises an important point. If other hunters arrive first and claim the boss, their rewards will be significantly reduced. The suggestion is clear. Instead of waiting, they could enter the cavern themselves and eliminate the boss now. Not everyone is eager to take the risk. A debate ensues, and it is decided that they will vote on whether to proceed. With only 17 members in the squad, the opinions are split. Some see an opportunity for greater rewards and vote in favor of continuing, while others fear the unknown danger ahead and vote against it. The final count is evenly divided. That leaves the deciding vote to Jin-Woo. For him, the decision isn't just about greed, it's about survival. He has only earned a single, near-worthless crystal in this raid, and money is a necessity if he wants to continue caring for his mother. And so, with his family's well-being in mind, Jin-Woo makes his choice. They will face the boss. The decision had been made. All 17 of them were going for the boss. They had already been at it for a while, and 40 minutes had passed just trying to diffuse the tension among the group. In an attempt to ease the atmosphere, Jin-Woo struck up a conversation with Jae-hee. From Jae-hee's expression alone, it was clear that she wasn't entirely comfortable with how things had played out. He had answered on behalf of everyone, and now there was no turning back. Jae-hee tried her best to keep her emotions in check, but Jin-Woo wasn't convinced. He couldn't help but ask if she was really sure she wasn't mad at him. As expected, even someone as quiet and composed as Jae-hee had her limits. Turns out, she was mad at him, and the more Jin-Woo tried to show that he was genuinely sorry, the more frustrated she became. However, in the middle of their bickering, something shifted between them. With a sharp look, Jae-hee suddenly demanded that Jin-Woo treat her to a meal after the raid. For a moment, Jin-Woo was completely at a loss for words. To Jae-hee, his silence only confirmed her worst suspicions. He was rejecting her request. But before she could get even more upset, he quickly agreed to her terms, saving himself from further trouble. Their exchange was abruptly cut short, as the raid leader finally located the entrance to the boss's cave. The moment they laid eyes on it, a wave of unease spread through the group. None of them had ever seen a door like this before. The sheer size and ominous presence of the entrance made some of the hunters hesitate, questioning whether it was even worth going after this boss. However, raid leader Song made his stance clear. After coming this far, he wasn't about to back down. Even if he had to face it alone, he would still go in. His unwavering resolve had a contagious effect on the others, and slowly, their anxiety began to fade. They remembered how strong Song was. If he wasn't afraid, then maybe they had a fighting chance. The massive doors creaked open with great difficulty, their very movement instilling an eerie sense of dread in the group. And just like that, they stepped into the boss's chambers. The moment they crossed the threshold, torches around the hall ignited on their own, illuminating the vast, dark space. Only now could they see the full scale of the room, and it was unlike anything they had encountered before. The walls were lined with torches, casting an unsettling glow that made the already menacing atmosphere even more terrifying. But the torches weren't the only thing filling the space. Statues, dozens of them, stood in eerie silence. Some held weapons, others held musical instruments, each carved with unsettling precision. Jin-Woo couldn't help but be amazed by the sheer scale of the chamber, but his attention quickly shifted to something else. One statue stood out from the rest. Positioned at the very center of the room, it was the largest by far. There was something unsettling about it, something off. Unlike the others, it seemed to command a different presence altogether. A suspicion crept into Jin-Woo's mind as he studied its massive form. The group wasted no time and split up, searching for any clues that could help him understand what they were dealing with. It was Song who came across the first hint, a magic seal. However, before he could inspect it further, another hunter called out to him. Before them stood a statue different from all the others. This one had wings and held a stone tablet inscribed with runic symbols. Seeing this as a potential lead, Song decided to translate the text while the others gathered around, listening intently. While Mr. Song remained focused on deciphering the runic text, a sudden rumbling noise filled the chamber, drawing everyone's attention. The heavy doors they had entered through had now closed behind them. Among the hunters, one of them stepped forward, clearly uneasy about the situation. He made it known that he had no intention of staying, nor did he care about the so-called boss or the treasure hidden within this place. Determined to leave, he approached the massive doors leading to the boss's chamber. But before he could lay a hand on them, Mr. Song's voice rang out in alarm, warning him not to touch them. The warning came too late. Before anyone could even register what had happened, a blur of movement sliced through the air. It was so fast, so precise, that not a single eye in the room could follow it. When they finally looked again, the horrifying truth became clear. The hunter's head had been cleanly severed from his body. The culprit? One of the stone statues standing near the door. The moment its task was done, the statue returned to its original pose, as if it had never moved at all. Fear gripped the remaining hunters as realization set in. These statues could move. Jae, shaken to her core, instinctively clung to Jin-Woo, her terror evident. Primal fear settled into Jin-Woo's chest. This statue wasn't just watching, it was aware. But that wasn't even the biggest problem. The room wasn't empty. It was filled with more of those smaller statues, just like the one that had taken the hunter's life in the blink of an eye. Jin-Woo's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. The hunter who had just been killed had been a D rank, a rank far above Jin-Woo himself. Yet even he had fallen instantly. This was supposed to be just a C-rank dungeon, a level that shouldn't have posed any real threat. And yet, the danger here was beyond anything they had anticipated. The runic text that Mr. Song had been trying to translate was now completely forgotten. Even the strongest hunter among them, Mr. Song himself, stood in stunned silence. The air in the chamber felt heavy with the realization that if the smaller statues could move, then the massive one in the center could likely move as well. As soon as that thought crossed Mr. Song's mind, Jin-Woo instinctively turned back toward the statue. And then something happened that made his blood run cold. The statue looked back at him. At that moment, his past flashed before his eyes. His first raid, the goblin-like monsters that had left him battered and bleeding, the sheer exhaustion and starvation that had nearly taken his life. He remembered how weak his weapons had been, how even the lowest-ranking dungeons had left him on the brink of death. Through it all, his mother's face had kept him going. Her condition required a fortune in medical bills, and he had thrown himself into these dungeons, risking his life over and over just to keep her alive. Time and time again, he had barely crawled out, covered in wounds, leaving other hunters baffled at how he managed to get injured even in the weakest E-rank dungeons. The hardships never stopped. If he wasn't paying for his mother's treatment, he was struggling to replace his tattered clothing after every raid. The dungeons had thrown all kinds of monsters at him, goblins, beasts, even a cyclopes-like creature at one point. But this was different. This statue, it wasn't just another monster. It was something far beyond anything Jin-Woo had ever faced before. Jin-Woo had spent so much time teetering on the edge of death that his instincts had sharpened beyond belief. A creeping sense of dread washed over him, and without hesitation, he reached for Jae, who stood beside him, frozen in fear. Urging everyone to drop to the ground immediately, his sudden outburst shocked the rest of the hunters. After all, no one expected the weakest among them to speak with such urgency. And then, in an instant, the massive statue's eyes flashed, crackling with energy like lightning splitting the sky. A moment later, a blinding beam tore through the room, aiming directly at Jin-Woo and the B-rank healer Jae. But thanks to his quick reflexes, they managed to hit the floor just in time, narrowly dodging the devastating attack. The hunters barely had time to process what had happened before chaos erupted. The statue wasn't done. It continued unleashing its deadly beams, obliterating the floor beneath them. The sheer power behind its attack was terrifying. Smoke poured from its eyes, and the ground where the energy struck melted into an almost liquid state. It took a few more seconds before the remaining hunters grasped the full horror of the situation. As they slowly came to their senses, their eyes fell upon something gruesome, a charred, severed hand, the remains of one of their fallen comrades. The realization hit them hard. That one attack had wiped out several hunters in an instant. The only reason some of them were still alive was because Jin-Woo had told them to keep their heads down. Even so, the aftermath left him barely able to stand, while Jae remained motionless on the floor. Mr. Song, one of the more experienced hunters, quickly warned everyone not to rise, stating that the statue would attack again if they did. At first, some hesitated, doubting his claim, but after what had just happened, defying his orders felt like signing their own death warrants. Jin-Woo, despite his own exhaustion, was more concerned about Jae, who hadn't moved since the attack. Mr. Song, seeing his worry, explained that Jae never handled fear well, which was why she only entered low-rank dungeons. But looking at the monstrous statues looming over them, there was no way anyone could still call this a low-rank dungeon. A realization dawned on Mr. Song. Only those who had followed his warning had survived. He pointed this out, which took Jin-Woo by surprise. But the surprise went both ways. Mr. Song had assumed Jin-Woo had screamed because he knew what was going to happen, yet Jin-Woo admitted he had only acted on instinct. That's when Jin-Woo noticed something that made his stomach drop. Mr. Song's left arm was missing. The previous attack had torn it clean off. Without hesitation, Jin-Woo rushed to stop the bleeding, managing to slow it down while the rest of the hunters sat in stunned silence, their eyes locked on the massive statue. The disbelief on Mr. Song's face was unmistakable. The difficulty of this dungeon was beyond anything they had ever encountered. His mind raced, trying to figure out just what kind of place they had walked into. And then it hit him. Based on what he was seeing, this could very well be an S-rank dungeon. His memory pulled up the rules of this temple, the Kartinon Temple. The first two rules were clear: worship and praise the Lord. The third rule: prove your faith. And the consequence for disobedience? Death. With most of the hunters too paralyzed by fear to think, only Mr. Song and Jin-Woo were still capable of piecing things together. They needed a plan. Destroying the statues was an option, but Mr. Song pointed out that it would take far too long. Meanwhile, another unsettling sight loomed before them, the very gate that had brought them into this nightmare. The first gates had appeared nearly a decade ago, emerging at random locations, sometimes at ground level, sometimes high above. Their arrival had changed the world forever. Among the many changes, the emergence of hunters stood out, ordinary people who, upon awakening, gained supernatural abilities to fight the monsters within the gates. But there was a catch. Once a hunter's power was awakened, it never grew stronger. Jin-Woo, despite being among the weakest, had still encountered terrifying creatures inside lower-ranked dungeons. But this was on an entirely different level. The massive statue, with its glowing eyes and devastating attacks, wasn't something he could simply fight his way through. Meanwhile, Mr. Song, though in pain from his missing arm, remained focused. He had brought 3 healers on this raid, but none could help. One had been killed outright by the statue's beam. Another was so paralyzed by fear that he couldn't function. And Jae, one of the strongest among them, was also too overwhelmed to move. The only thing they could do now was stay perfectly still. The statues didn't seem to attack unless they moved. While the others sat frozen in place, Mr. Song and Jin-Woo desperately searched for a way out of this mess. Most of the hunters were too horrified to think, still struggling to process the sheer devastation they had witnessed. Jin-Woo, meanwhile, sat there with clenched fists, his mind racing. The raw desperation on his face was clear. He wasn't ready to die here. There had to be a way to survive without challenging these statues head-on. One of the raid hunters struggled back to his feet. He had just joined a major guild. Throwing his life away this early wasn't part of the plan. But fear wasn't his only driving force. His legs were unusually strong, and he had confidence in his speed. If there was a way out, he was going to take it. The squad leader, Song, was furious. He had ordered the hunter to stay put, but his warning fell on deaf ears. Instead, the hunter made his move, launching himself toward the doors at full speed. Determination burned in his eyes. He knew he could make it, but the temple had other plans. The moment he bolted, the massive statue in the center of the room came to life. Its eyes gleamed ominously, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. Jin-Woo and Mr. Song barely had time to process what was happening before a beam of light shot forth. The result was horrifying. Where the hunter had once been, only his feet remained, severed cleanly at the ankles. The rest of him had been erased from existence in an instant. Terror spread like wildfire among the remaining hunters. Some screamed at the top of their lungs, their minds unable to grasp the brutality they had just witnessed. Others were so paralyzed with fear that no sound escaped their throats. Jin-Woo, however, wasn't just afraid. He was furious. These statues could kill them at any moment, but they weren't. That fact gnawed at him. Why weren't they being attacked outright? Mr. Song shared his confusion. Every other monster they had faced before had acted on pure aggression, striking at anything that moved. But these creatures were different. A pattern began to emerge. The guardian statue at the door only attacked those who approached it. The central statue eliminated anyone who moved. So what was the rule here? Jin-Woo's mind raced as he pieced everything together. And then, his gaze landed on something. A statue unlike the others. This one held a stone slab, its surface etched with ancient runic text. A memory clicked into place. Mr. Song had translated those runes earlier. They spoke of the rules of the Temple of Kartinon. That was it. That was the key. Realization dawned on Jin-Woo's face. He turned to Mr. Song, his expression sharp with newfound understanding, and asked about the first rule of the temple. Confused, Mr. Song struggled to recall. Why would that even matter right now? But after a moment, the answer came to him: worship the Lord. The Lord, it had to be the statue in the center. With that confirmation, Jin-Woo took action. He began to rise to his feet. Mr. Song was immediately alarmed. This was suicide. He called out to Jin-Woo, urging him to stop, demanding to know what he was thinking. But Jin-Woo didn't answer. His focus was locked on the answer forming in his mind. Mr. Song's protests grew more frantic. Why was Jin-Woo doing this? Was he out of his mind? But then, as he looked into Jin-Woo's face, something shifted. The panic in his voice died down. Because what he saw wasn't the expression of a man about to die. Jin-Woo knew something. And whatever it was, it just might save them. Almost steady on his feet, Jin-Woo wasted no time explaining the pattern he had noticed in a massive statue before them. But the moment he stood up completely, the statue's eyes began to sparkle ominously. A chill shot down his spine, and before he even had time to think, his instincts took over. He immediately dropped to the ground. The look in his eyes said it all. He had just experienced a fear beyond words, the kind that only came when death itself was staring straight at him. And then, something strange happened. The moment Jin-Woo lowered himself, the statue seemed to hesitate, as if reconsidering its attack. That was it. In an instant, everything clicked. The first rule, he finally understood its meaning. Without wasting a second, he turned to the other hunters, urgently trying to convey what he had realized. But instead of understanding, most of them just stared at him like he had completely lost his mind. Their expressions ranged from confusion to outright disbelief. Why was he suddenly acting like this? It wasn't until Mr. Song took a closer look at him that something shifted. The old hunter could see it, the certainty in Jin-Woo's face. He wasn't just guessing. He knew what he was doing. Meanwhile, the statue remained seated on its throne, its gaze locked onto them. Jin-Woo continued his frantic explanation, though even as he bowed his head before the towering figure, it was clear from his expression, he wasn't submitting. He had no intention of obeying anything. Mr. Song, covered in sweat and still struggling with his injuries, could only hope Jin-Woo truly understood what he was doing. And when he asked if the young hunter was sure about this, Jin-Woo met him with that same unwavering look. He was. There was no other choice now. With no better options, the remaining hunters reluctantly followed his lead. One by one, they bowed before the enormous statue, clinging to the desperate hope that this would somehow be their way out. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The statue remained motionless, sitting in eerie silence. That's when Jae finally snapped back to reality, still dazed from shock. What hunters? What giant statue? No one had even moved. Yet something had changed. The expression on the statue's face was different now, and the hunters felt it. A deep, paralyzing dread gripped them, tightening like a noose. The statue hadn't lifted a finger, but the mere change in its expression sent their fear skyrocketing. Even Jin-Woo, despite understanding the first rule, had no idea what was supposed to happen next. Then, in the silence, a realization struck Hunter Park. The statue wasn't attacking anymore. Even after its previous assault, it had stopped completely. But instead of relief, the suffocating anxiety in the room only grew worse. Taking a gamble, Hunter Park cautiously rose to his feet. When nothing happened, the others hesitantly followed, slowly standing one after another. For a brief moment, a flicker of hope spread among them. Maybe it was finally over. But Jin-Woo knew better. Something was wrong. The air grew heavy, and then came the sound, a deep, ominous rumbling. The ground beneath them trembled violently, sending a fresh wave of terror through the hunters. And then it moved. The massive statue in the center of the temple, far larger than anything else in the room, rose to its feet. Each step it took shattered the ground, reducing the stone floor beneath it to splinters. The sheer weight of its presence made it impossible to ignore. The hunters barely had time to process what they were seeing, but one thing was certain: this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something even worse. A towering colossus, standing hundreds of times bigger than any human, loomed over them. Pure, unshakable terror settled over the room. Mr. Song turned to him. But to his horror, Jin-Woo had nothing. For the first time, even he had no idea what to do. Frozen in fear, he could only stare as the massive statue set its sights on them, its expression as cold and merciless as ever. The massive statue wasted no time in attacking, stomping down as if the hunters were nothing more than insects beneath its feet. Every step sent shockwaves rippling through the ground, the impact strong enough to mimic an earthquake. Maintaining balance became a struggle, the floor beneath them trembling violently. Amidst the chaos, Jin-Woo's mind clicked into action. He recalled the second rule of this temple: worship the Lord, and quickly shared it with the others. But how exactly were they supposed to do that? No one had an answer. The group scrambled for a solution, but before they could make sense of it, one of the hunters, a former member of a church choir, stepped forward. He believed he could praise the Lord and gathered his thoughts, clutching the cross hanging around his neck. As the enormous statue advanced, its sheer size made the difference between humans and gods painfully clear. Yet, Jinwoo's expression didn't change. If anything, there was a flicker of anticipation on his face. The rest of the hunters, on the other hand, watched in awe as the choir member began his praises. For a brief moment, it seemed to be working. The tension in the air shifted, hope flickering in their eyes. But then, reality struck. Jinwoo's face said otherwise. The statue's expression contorted into something even more terrifying. Its massive foot, looming high above, came crashing down toward the hunter who had been singing praises. Fear drained the color from the man's face as he realized, too late, that he had been worshiping the wrong god. Before he could even react, the statue crushed him beneath its colossal weight. Panic surged through the remaining hunters. Their fragile hope shattered in an instant, replaced by unfiltered terror. Some tried to flee, running like ants scattering from a predator. Others were too paralyzed by fear to move. But the statue showed no mercy, trampling over everything in its path. Jae barely managed to move, only escaping because of Jin-Woo. Without him, she would have met the same fate as the others. Meanwhile, Hunter Park, teetering on the brink of death, found himself consumed by thoughts of his pregnant wife. He reached the very edge of the room, momentarily thinking he was safe, until Hunter Kim's frantic voice called out for him to turn around. The warning came too late. A statue positioned behind Hunter Park struck without hesitation, slicing him cleanly in two. His death was swift, brutal, a stark reminder of just how merciless these statues were. Yet, as soon as the deed was done, the statue returned to its original position, standing still, just like the ones near the entrance. On the other side of the room, the larger statue continued its rampage, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Jin-Woo, forced into a corner, searched desperately for a way out. But with armed statues behind them and the colossal figure in front, every escape route seemed blocked. Each statue wielded a different weapon, each one designed solely for the purpose of killing. Then, realization hit him. Not all the statues were armed. Some held musical instruments instead. Piecing it together, Jin-Woo analyzed the pattern. The statues that had slaughtered the hunters all carried weapons, but those without them had yet to attack. If they weren't armed, they likely posed no threat. Without wasting a second, he relayed his discovery to the others. The first to act was Mr. Song. Reaching the nearest statue with a musical instrument, he stood his ground, waiting. And sure enough, the statue began to play. Encouraged by the result, he called for the others to do the same. Hunter Kim, although still shaken by fear, followed suit. He collapsed at the base of one of the musical statues, exhausted and trembling, barely able to comprehend the carnage surrounding him. Jin-Woo, along with one of the hunters still able to move, pushed toward another statue. But something was wrong. The statue remained motionless, its instrument untouched. Horror crept into their eyes as they realized it wasn't playing. Jae, overcome with terror, was already drenched in tears. Jin-Woo had no choice but to leave her in front of the statue with the drum, hoping it would keep her safe. Without looking back, he bolted toward another one, ignoring the burning exhaustion in his legs. The massive statue's gaze locked onto him. He didn't dare slow down. But just when he thought he had reached another safe zone, a shadow loomed over him. The statue that had been standing far away had suddenly moved, its enormous foot now hovering directly above his head. He barely managed to dodge in time, rolling away at the last second. Before he could recover, Mr. Song's urgent shout rang out. Jin-Woo had made a mistake. He had run to the wrong statue. The one before him wasn't holding an instrument. It was gripping a shield. That realization sank in a second too late. The shielded statue struck, launching a deadly attack straight at Jin-Woo. Jae, left behind at the drum statue, screamed his name in horror. Bloodied and barely standing, Jin-Woo struggled to move. His injuries slowed him down. He could barely drag himself forward, let alone escape properly. Crawling away in desperation, he couldn't help but notice the way the massive statue looked at him. It was smiling, mocking him. Once again, he found himself teetering on the edge of life and death, hanging by the thinnest thread. His vision blurred, his body almost completely drenched in blood. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the statues, the one that resembled a girl, suddenly moved. Instead of attacking, it reached out gently. Jin-Woo had somehow managed to crawl to the feet of an angelic-looking statue, one that wasn't holding a weapon at all. At the brink of death, he had survived once again. And, as if responding to this shift, the colossal statue that had been trampling everything in its path finally stopped. As soon as the massive statue stopped moving, Jae rushed toward Jin-Woo. The moment she got close enough to see him properly, her face filled with sheer horror. Jin-Woo, still dazed and exhausted, couldn't understand why she looked so alarmed, until he glanced down at himself. That's when he noticed it. His right leg was gone. Yet, even after realizing such a severe injury, he felt no reaction within himself. He was simply too drained to care. Without a word, he leaned back against the statue behind him, allowing his body to rest. Meanwhile, Jae immediately began treating his wound, determined to heal him. But just as she worked her magic, blood suddenly began pouring from her nose and mouth. She had pushed herself past her limits. The remaining squad members watched in silence, tension hanging thick in the air. Among them, Hunter Kim finally spoke up, pointing out a grim reality. When they had first entered this dungeon, there were 17 of them. Now, only 6 remained. And even among those 6, 2 were in critical condition. Mr. Song, who had lost an arm, was one of them. The other was Jin-Woo, barely holding on. Blame was quick to follow. Hunter Kim didn't hesitate to place the responsibility squarely on Mr. Song, claiming that his reckless decision to lead them here had cost so many lives. But before their argument could escalate, something happened that made them all freeze in place. The massive statue moved. A wave of terror washed over the remaining hunters as they stared at the once motionless figure. Then, without warning, a deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. Right in front of the statue's throne, a pillar began to rise from the ground. And it didn't stop there. Something else followed. A strange structure, eerily resembling an altar, emerged from beneath the earth. Watching this unfold, the survivors could only hope that history wasn't about to repeat itself. The last time the dungeon had surprised them, it had ended in a massacre. As the structure settled into place, the floor revealed a circular design, with a stone slab positioned at its center. None of the hunters had any idea what it could be. But even in his weakened state, Jin-Woo recognized it immediately. It was an altar. The other hunters stared at him in disbelief when he voiced his realization. And soon, a dreadful understanding settled over them all. The third and final commandment of the Temple of Kartinon had just become clear. Mr. Song's expression changed upon hearing Jin-Woo's words, and even Jin-Woo himself, despite his exhaustion, seemed strangely calm. But before anyone could react further, Hunter Kim stepped forward, drawing his sword from his air vault. With a firm grip, he pointed the blade straight at Mr. Song, his gaze cold and unwavering. To him, there was no question about it. Their current situation was entirely Mr. Song's fault. He reminded the squad leader of the 11 hunters who had perished under his command and declared that the only way forward was for Mr. Song to take responsibility. A sacrifice had to be made. Jin-Woo, however, disagreed, but his words were met with nothing but hysterical outrage. Mr. Song, on the other hand, didn't argue. Instead, he acknowledged his mistake, accepting that their suffering had been the result of his poor judgment. But even as he took responsibility, Jin-Woo still refused to believe that this was the right solution. Despite the objections, Mr. Song made his decision. Without hesitation, he stepped toward the altar, his eyes fixed on the strange symbols engraved upon it, symbols he had never seen before. As he reached its center, the chamber remained eerily silent. Then, in an instant, a flame ignited behind him. Hunter Kim, who had been so adamant about the sacrifice, found himself at a loss for words. He hadn't expected this to happen. Turning toward Jin-Woo, Mr. Song sought his thoughts on the matter, but the look on Jin-Woo's face made it clear he hadn't anticipated this outcome either. Realizing this, Jin-Woo decided to take a risk. With the help of the other hunters, he slowly made his way toward the altar, his body still weak, but his mind sharp. The moment he and 2 others stepped into the circle, more flames ignited, just as they had for Mr. Song. 3 in total. It was then that Jin-Woo voiced a pressing question. Was there even a chance of rescue? But Mr. Song's response wasn't reassuring. If they waited too long, there was a high likelihood that the statues would move again. And if that happened, their fate would be sealed. As exhaustion weighed heavy on him, Jin-Woo continued to analyze their situation. The only way out of this dungeon was to kill the boss and close the gate before the 7-day limit expired. But there was something that unsettled him. What if the time limit ran out while they were still trapped inside? If that happened, the monsters lurking within wouldn't just stay here. They would escape. Jin-Woo turned around, motioning for Jae-hee and Hunter Kim to step into the circle. If his guess was right, the trials would only begin once all the hunters were inside. The two exchanged hesitant glances before finally stepping forward. With that, all the remaining survivors of the squad had gathered, and the last of the lights flickered on. Then, without warning, additional lights appeared outside their circle, but these glowed an eerie blue. Confusion spread among the hunters as they stood there, uncertain of what this new development meant. The room fell into a tense silence, everyone too focused on deciphering the situation. A low rumbling suddenly echoed from the doorway, breaking their thoughts. Instinctively, all eyes turned toward the massive doors as they began to swing open. The hunters stared in disbelief. Even though the doors had opened, the towering guard station beside them hadn't moved an inch. Not that it mattered at the moment, because for the first time, an escape route had revealed itself. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. Hope surged through the hunters, and nervous whispers quickly turned into frantic shouts. Their only thought now was the possibility of getting out alive. However, just as the tension reached its peak, movement rippled through the room. The statues lining the perimeter began shifting to the side. Panic set in, positioned near the center of the room. The hunters had no idea how they were supposed to reach the exit before the statues closed in on them. Desperation took over as they scrambled to find some loophole, some way to slip past the incoming threat. Amidst the chaos, Jin-Woo noticed something. After his gaze fell upon certain statues, they stopped moving. Realization dawned on him. Meanwhile, Jae-hee, too terrified to face what was happening, squeezed her eyes shut. But Jin-Woo quickly told her not to. Keeping their eyes on the statues might just be the key to survival. He urged the others to do the same, making sure they focused entirely on the unmoving figures. Time passed, and slowly, the blue light surrounding the outer circle began to fade. Jin-Woo remained locked in concentration, ensuring not a single statue moved closer. Then, abruptly, a scream rang out behind him. One of the surviving hunters, overwhelmed by fear, suddenly broke formation and dashed toward the exit. The moment she stepped out of the inner circle, one of the red lights, a marker indicating the number of people inside, went out. She ran with everything she had, heading straight for the door. The other hunters watched in shock as she managed to slip past the statues. This unknown hunter became the first to escape, but in her panic, she failed to notice something crucial. The moment she left the room, the massive gate leading outside started to close, ever so slightly. Jin-Woo's mind raced. A strange pattern was beginning to form. He started piecing together every rule that had been presented in this dungeon so far. The first trial had demanded they honor the Lord, forcing them to kneel before the massive statue at the center of the room. The second had required them to praise the Lord, where those with musical instruments had stepped forward to play. Now, with the exit in sight, a final test had emerged. As the realization settled in, Jin-Woo analyzed the situation carefully. The answer had been in front of them all along. The third test was not about running or fighting. It was about faith. In the face of imminent death, they had to remain steadfast. Those who panicked and ran would only doom themselves. Jin-Woo now understood, and if he was right, this would be their final test of survival. While Jin-Woo was still trying to make sense of this entire ordeal, one of the hunters suddenly turned to him with an apology, one that didn't sit right. Before Jin-Woo could react, the hunter shoved him aside, sending him crashing hard against the altar. Shocked, Jin-Woo yelled after him, his voice filled with disbelief. The betrayal was written all over his face, a mixture of contempt and anger flashing in his eyes. How could a comrade just abandon them like this? Yet, just like the last girl who had managed to escape, this hunter, too, made it past the statue of knights near the gate. Hunter Juhee and Hunter Kim had witnessed it before, but now, as they watched another one slip away, realization dawned on them. The way Jin-Woo clenched his jaw made it clear no one else could afford to leave this room. The reason was simple. To keep these statues in check, they had to keep their eyes on them. If even one more person left, 6 eyes wouldn't be enough to monitor all the statues at once. It was a risk they couldn't take. Mr. Song, sensing the urgency in Jin-Woo's expression, finally demanded an explanation. He needed to understand what was happening. Jin-Woo wasted no time in laying it out. Right now, their main goal was to watch the statues as they slowly advanced. The lights surrounding the outer circle weren't just decorations. They were a countdown. Once those lights disappeared, they would finally be able to leave. Hunter Kim listened intently, nodding along as if convinced. But then, something in his expression shifted. He hesitated before asking a pressing question. If those blue lights were to go out completely, could the gate close? Jin-Woo didn't miss the change in his tone. It was clear Hunter Kim was thinking about something he really shouldn't be. A sinking feeling settled in Jin-Woo's chest as he processed the implications. Hunter Kim, meanwhile, was having his own moment of self-reflection. The thought that someone like Jin-Woo, a hunter he had always considered weak, was now the one keeping them alive was almost unbelievable. A bitter chuckle escaped him as he admitted that he had looked down on Jin-Woo all this time. Yet here they were, surviving because of him. For the first time, he expressed genuine gratitude. But Jin-Woo wasn't buying it, not entirely. Something about Kim's words didn't sit right, and those nagging doubts refused to leave his mind. Then it happened. Hunter Kim, overwhelmed with fear, broke down completely, tears and snot running down his face as he repeated over and over that he didn't want to die. His voice trembled with apologies as he began inching toward the door. Jin-Woo's heart sank. He knew exactly where this was going, and he wasn't about to let it happen again. He pleaded with Hunter Kim, desperately trying to make him reconsider, trying to stop him from making a choice they would all regret. But it was no use. Hunter Kim was already too far gone. As he slipped past the statues, Jin-Woo felt the all-too-familiar sting of betrayal settling in once more. He had hoped, even begged, for a different outcome, but the result was the same. And just like that, the door to the exit shut even tighter. It was only after Kim had left that Mr. Song finally pieced together the meaning of this ordeal. If someone remained at the altar, the exit would stay open. But if they all left at once, the city would close for good. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he made a firm decision. They had no choice but to escape while they still could. Jin-Woo, however, wasn't willing to accept that. Even after everything, he refused to let Mr. Song sacrifice himself. But things took an unexpected turn. Because Jin-Woo was still missing his right leg, Mr. Song turned to Juhee, urging her to help Jin-Woo escape. Yet before she could even respond, she collapsed onto the ground, her legs refusing to hold her weight. A wave of panic flickered in her eyes as she tried to stand, only for her body to tremble violently. She didn't understand what was happening, why she suddenly couldn't move. Mr. Song, observing the situation, quickly assessed the cause. It had to be her mana. She had used up everything, pushing herself to the limit, and now her body was suffering the consequences. Realizing this, Jin-Woo turned back to Mr. Song, insisting that he take Ju-hee and leave. But Mr. Song refused, arguing back that someone had to stay behind. What followed was a heated back and forth, both unwilling to abandon the other. But as much as Jin-Woo wanted to fight it, the reality was that neither he nor Ju-hee could get out on their own. In the end, Mr. Song was left with no choice. He would have to leave with Ju-hee, whether he liked it or not. Then, Ju-hee suddenly spoke up, offering a solution. She suggested that she be the one to stay behind instead. It was then that Jin-Woo was reminded of his promise to her. That casual plan to go out for dinner together, something that now seemed like a lifetime ago. He knew, deep down, that he wouldn't be able to keep that promise anymore. With a heavy heart, he handed her the only magic crystal he had earned that day, a silent parting gift. But Ju-hee, ever stubborn, refused to take it. Instead, she insisted on staying behind, unwavering in her decision. And then, before anyone could argue further, she was suddenly struck with a sharp and very forceful blow to the neck. It was Mr. Song. Having realized she wasn't going to back down, he had taken matters into his own hands. Without hesitation, he knocked her unconscious and hoisted her up, prepared to carry her out himself. Jin-Woo, barely holding on, turned to Mr. Song, asking for a sequel, another chance to keep going, to take care of her. But Mr. Song, unwilling to leave him behind, reassured him that he would do his best. With that, Mr. Song and Ju-hee finally stepped away, leaving the dungeon behind. Jin-Woo, however, had no strength left, not even enough to lift his head. And yet, amid all the suffering, there was a small relief. At least Mr. Song and Ju-hee had made out safely. But Jin-Woo had no such escape. The stone statues, the cold, merciless sentinels of this nightmare, began closing in on the last remaining hunter in the room. Bloodied and scarred, he barely managed to grasp the sword left behind by the traitorous Hunter Kim. He struggled, resisting the overwhelming power of the dungeon, even though every inch of his body screamed in agony. One particular statue, the Hunter of the Living, stood before him. Its gaze was void of emotion, a chilling emptiness that mirrored the betrayal Jin-Woo had suffered. And yet, after a moment, his own eyes hardened. There was no more fear, only courage, the kind that met death head-on with dignity. But courage alone wasn't enough. A statue swung its massive spear, piercing straight through Jin-Woo's chest. In a swift, brutal motion, it nearly cleaved him in half, sending him crashing onto the altar. Blood poured from his wounds, painting the cold stone beneath him. Pain blurred his vision, but his mind still clung to a single memory, Hunter Kim's final words before betraying him. The way he had thanked Jin-Woo, apologized, and then handed him over to death as if it were an act of mercy. How he claimed that only one person needed to die. But Jin-Woo hadn't wanted to die at all. And yet, fate seemed merciless. As if following some unseen command, the statue raised its weapon again, preparing to deliver the final blow. Jin-Woo had nothing left, no strength, no hope. He could do nothing but plead, even if only in his heart, for another chance. And then, everything stopped. The statue, which had been moments away from ending him, suddenly froze in place. A glowing window appeared before Jin-Woo. Not for the first time, he found himself staring at something completely beyond his understanding. The window stated that he had met all the requirements for a hidden quest, Courage of the Weak. But even after reading the message, none of it made sense to him. Before he could process what was happening, another window appeared. It asked if he would accept the assignment. If he refused, his heart would be severed in precisely 0.2 seconds. This was it, his second chance at life. Without hesitation, he accepted. And just like that, the monstrous statue, the one that had slaughtered so many hunters, returned to its original, motionless state. In the next instant, blinding light consumed everything around Jin-Woo. And here we wrap this up. If you like this part, make sure to hit that like button and help us reach our goal of 1,000 likes. And if you haven't already, subscribe to stay updated on the next part. Your support keeps these stories coming. See you in the next one.